Hello and welcome to Denver Startup Week. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? The audio is working? Okay. For those of you that were here for our keynote yesterday, I apologize. We had some audio issues, so we think we've resolved that. We're excited. Day 3 of Startup Week. We're about halfway through, and hopefully all of you have been able to attend some sessions. If you haven't, there's plenty more on the roster. All of product is here in this venue this year, so if that's the topic you're interested in, it's super easy, but lots of other venues around Denver, and hopefully you can check it out. My name is Scotty Allen. I'm a co-chair of the product track. And I was hoping the other co-chair would be here so I could publicly shame him for all the hard work he's done and helped here. But anyway, Ryan Margolis helps run the product track, so we'll shame him on another session. Today, before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors. Denver Startup Week is the largest free startup conference in the world. So this is put on completely by volunteers. It's had many years before it, and COVID definitely changed how we did things. So this year we're excited to be back in person. I was just talking with the panel up here. We're happy to be like in normal clothes and here to share some fun ideas with all of you. So to kick things off, I do want to thank our sponsors because again, they make it all happen. So let me see. So title sponsors, well, presenting sponsors, Amazon. Title sponsors are Capital One, Dell, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. And then there's a lot of other folks on here, great brands that make this free to all of you. It's amazing. We didn't have to fly somewhere, pay $2,000 to attend an event, and hear from amazing product leaders. So thank you to these sponsors, as well as the rest of the sponsors in Denver that help make this happen in the rest of the metro area. So if you get a chance, you see these brands around town, definitely encourage you to give them a shout out. And beyond that, thank you to all of you. Again, this is a free conference. It's the community that puts it together. So you attending these sessions, networking, and maybe in the future being up here on a panel, it's what keeps this going. So if any of you would like to talk about how you can get involved in the future, I'd love to run through that with you. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump straight into the panel. Before we do intros, I just want to talk a little bit about what this panel's for. Obviously, all of you are here to see how these folks have screwed up in their careers and the mistakes that they've made. But in reality, all of those are amazing learning opportunities. And so whether you're seasoned in your career as a product person or you're more junior, we can always learn from each other's mistakes and what they've learned from them. So while we'll hear some hopefully pretty juicy stories of things that have gone wrong, you'll have plenty of opportunity to see how those have been corrected and what the teams learned from it. So hopefully it's got a positive spin on it. But yeah, we'll try and keep it pretty collaborative. So I'll try and stop the panel at times. And if you have any questions, we can jump in on those topics. Also, if any of you have other things you want to add or jump in, please, again, it's about the community here. So I want to leave that open to you. To better understand the folks in the room real fast before we do the introductions, how many of you are in product currently, a product role? Okay, cool. About over half. How many of you are aspiring to get into product or interested in the profession? Okay, a few. What about parallel career tracks? Designers, engineers? Cool. All right, it sounds like we have the right folks here. All right, so with that, maybe we'll just go from one side. I'll start maybe with you, Kevin. Introduce yourself, kind of how you got into product and a little bit of your journey.
Yeah, good morning. Oh. Is this, all right, cool.
Can you guys hear him in the back?
Can you hear me? No. Got the green light on.
Turn it towards you, maybe?
There we go. That sounds better. Okay. Hey, good morning. I'm Kevin Menzie. Yeah, so I have a mix of both UX product design as well as product leadership. So started my time out here in Colorado founding and running this UX agency called Slice of Lime for 15 years. And that was awesome. We kind of rode the wave of UX even becoming a thing and learned a lot about UX as well as how to run a company. That got acquired by Pivotal. You might know Pivotal Labs if you don't know Pivotal. They acquired the company. I ran their Boulder office for a year, and that was the first time I actually ran into a product manager. I hadn't actually thought about that role until then, and I saw how valuable that was. And I jumped from there to Sphero, to do some product management. And Sphero does like robotic products for kids that inspire the creators of tomorrow. That was like a whole, like drinking from the fire hose, learning about product, but also learning about like kind of jumping from software to what it means to do hardware. And so I was like flying off to China and really just like trying to keep up with all of that whole new world. And from there, let's see, over the pandemic, I was chief product officer at a startup called Beanstalk that went through Techstars. They did a live interactive show for kids. It was like perfect timing actually for that time period. It was, if you can picture like Mr. Rogers or even an animated character, you know, turning to your kid that's watching the show and saying, "Hey Joey, like what do you think we should do now?" That's kind of what the experience was like, and it was super fun and really special, like every single day to interact with these kids. And recently, I am now running product design at a company called Outside up in Boulder. And so Outside, you may think of the magazine, Outside Magazine, but it actually has acquired all kinds of things. It has a whole bunch of publications that have to do with the outdoors, but also has like a streaming, like films and TV series stuff, kind of like Netflix for the outdoors. We actually have all the Warren Miller films, so that's coming up. There's like a master class for the outdoors. We have a learning thing. There's apps like Gaia and Trailforks. There's even a Web3 thing that we're doing called the Outerverse. That's kind of our answer to the metaverse that deals with NFTs and encourages people to get outside. The whole mission of Outside is to get more people outside. So from a product design perspective, there's a whole slew of products that we're looking at and trying to figure out, you know, really, you know, what problems are we solving for these users? How can we get more people outside? And it's just like it's a lot of fun. So that's my background.
Thanks, Kevin. My name's Sam Bowden. I am a co-founder and head of product at Wonder. Wonder's based in Boulder, Colorado. Got my start as a product designer, kind of cut my teeth in the early 2000s in New York. It was kind of when the startup scene there was in a fledgling state. Worked with everything from two-person unfunded startups all the way up to kind of the big boys. Held a role as a designer in residence at a New York venture capital firm. Also worked as a hired gun. So people would bring me in for 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, and I'd help them, you know, design and craft a product and a strategy. Generally, I tend to focus on kind of the complicated problems out there. I could absolutely help you with an iPhone app. I'd probably be the most expensive iPhone app designer and product manager out there. But if you want to build something to, you know, manage analytics for large social networks, or you want to build high-frequency trading platforms, or you want to help arm the DoD with anti-terrorist software, those are the things that tend to kind of come across my desk. About 8 years ago, wanted to start working on something much more mission-oriented, something probably much more long-term, and really kind of dug into renewable energy. I think of climate change as probably being the largest, biggest, most important problem out there. And so myself and my co-founders kind of tackled that space and tried to figure out where an early stage software team could insert themselves and produce a lot of value. You know, we ended up focusing on commercial and industrial solar projects. So these are projects that service hospitals, schools, municipalities. They also service retail, multifamily residential, warehouses, cold storage distribution centers. The list goes on. It's sort of a catch-all. But largely, we apply software to try and manage for that variability, drive down the transaction costs associated with developing, financing, and constructing those projects, and make them more profitable to build. So it's a matter of improving the economics. It's also a matter of expediting the deployment of megawatts of solar. And our focus is on, you know, how to arm our teammates with superpowers that allow them to do that better.
Real quick, for those of you in the back that are having trouble hearing, there are lots of seats up here. Unfortunately, we have kind of 2 mics duct taped together to get this space working. One is for the camera and one's for the room. So I'd encourage all of you, there's about 20 seats up here. If you do want to be able to hear a little bit better, come on up. And we'll try and hold the mics a little closer. Sorry about that.
Testing. Hopefully that's good. Thanks, everybody. We don't bite. Look at these faces. So I'm Jess Sherlock. I actually started my career working in agencies. So how many of you are, I know a couple of you from previous panels, but how many of you are at agencies or consultancies of some kind? Okay, some folks. So I started my career there doing at the time what was called digital project management, which come to find out was a whole heck of a lot of product management. So stumbled into product very accidentally, got an opportunity to join a super early stage startup right as they were closing their Series A. And so I was the first product manager beyond after the founders. And so I've seen an organization grow from 12 engineers kind of running one bullpen of a backlog to 8 Agile teams running Scaled Agile across a couple different products and an innovation team. So I ended up as the director of product after about 4 years, led everything product and product strategy as well as people management. So lots of stories to tell around that. After 4 years, I needed some time. I don't know if anybody else has done the startup journey, but it's exhausting. So I took some time off, and ever since 2019, I've actually been running my own business where I offer product management coaching to individuals at all sizes of companies across the US, as well as primarily focusing with organizations that are in that early stage period, probably just landing funding and trying to figure out how to move from founder-led products to true product teams. And so coming in and providing fractional product leadership, initial recruiting, and setting up of processes and product strategy. So lots of stories to pull.
Awesome. I'm Stacy Velaradsky, and I actually have had 3 different career paths in my lifetime. And I started as an interior designer. And then during the 2009 recession, I ended up getting more into sales and business development, worked with companies like Tempur-Pedic and Walmart. And then when I moved to Colorado 8 years ago, I started my own web design agency. So also was a little bit in the agency world as well. I ended up building the first version of a mobile app for a company called Walkthrough, which was in Techstars Boulder. And that's where I really discovered product and fell in love with it and thought, hey, this could be a really great spot for me since I have design, sales, biz dev, I've run an agency, I've managed people. I thought it could be a really good place for me to really stand in my career. And so since then, the past couple of years, I've worked with early stage startups, and I've worked with kind of a mid-stage telehealth company, CRSMD, and then I've also worked with a really large Fortune 500 company that you probably know, DaVita. Even though I've worked in both small, medium, and large companies, I've pretty much been a solo PM working with other teams. Even when we had other PMs, we would work across the aisle and they would have their own individual parts of the product that they'd be managing. So mostly solo and kind of running the show there. So a lot that I can share as well.
So it's a good panel. We should have plenty of stories to pull from. So I guess before we have these folks air their dirty laundry, quick round of applause for the panel here, and thanks for coming out. So the first question is really going to get right into it and what the title of the session is. Really, what are your favorite fuck-up stories from your career? But really beyond that, how do you wish it would have gone differently? And then, what do you wish you might have incorporated earlier to have avoided that? Any and all of those in your answers would be probably helpful for the crowd. Kevin, do you want to start?
All right. Are you ready for this? Here we go. So the first one that comes to mind for me, it doesn't feel like it's working.
No, it doesn't.
All right. You can hear me though, right? Okay. All right. So this is interesting because I'm going to try to dodge naming the guilty and so you can maybe kind of figure it out as I talk, but. This is about a product that never launched, but we spent close to 2 years developing it, and so a lot of time, people time. So if you picture 8 salaried people working for a couple years. Plus, the nature of the product was very complex, involved hardware. So very expensive to develop the product. The hypothesis for the product was, hey, this is going to help inspire creativity in some form in kids. And about this time, I became VP of product, kind of towards the end of it. So I kind of came in, and this thing was actually like you could kind of hold it. It actually worked. And at that point in time, if you picture 2 years later, that's when we started talking to users about the product. Right? So there was never a conversation about like, hey, is this actually filling a need that somebody has? In this case, kids and parents. And so once we started doing that, it got scary because we realized kids are pretty creative on their own. they didn't really need this product. And at that point, we started to scramble a little bit and try to find different angles. Oh, well, what if it did this? Would it work? And so we're trying to wedge different solutions into this technology. And I think what happened is at that point in time, and it was kind of an inflection point at the company, it was very much a engineering-led company. So the people that really cared about speaking to users, they didn't quite have that voice yet. And that changed over time for the better. But we fell in love with the technology, and it was super cool technology. We were using like AI, machine learning. There was a camera that could recognize things. It was like, whoa, like that was like so exciting, and we were so smart, and we got it to work. But we didn't know who we were really making this product for and why they would want it. And so it was, in my mind, a giant failure because of so much money, and I'm talking millions. So much money invested, and what else could we have been doing during that time, right? So that's always the one that comes to mind, and we learned from that, and we started to create much better products after that. But it's definitely a fuck up story.
Cool. Mine's a little bit opposite of that. So this is actually at Wonder, current company. Project finance is sort of central to developing a solar project. It doesn't matter what scale you're talking about, finance and where the capital is coming from is first and foremost top of mind. There are a couple of different investors that are involved with any solar project. And if I get too far in the weeds, you guys just start raising your hands. One of them has a lot of leverage over whether that transaction moves forward or not. And as a result of that being the dynamic for years, they've come up with a number of different, very gnarly banking structures that we have to accommodate when we're going to build a new solar project. Specifically, they want what's called a lockbox. So think about an incredibly advanced bank account where money comes in one side and then it's dispersed on the other end in accordance with a waterfall. So we kind of configure this bank account. It's kind of like automated cash flow management. And it's really complicated to both set up and kind of administrate on an ongoing basis. Everybody wants a lockbox. And what we found is that we could do that. We could build them a lockbox. We could do this at scale. We could automate a lot of the setup. We could automate a lot of the administration. We could not just build one solar project and enable a lockbox. We could actually build 10,000 solar projects, and each of them would have their own lockbox. What we did effectively was build what the customer asked for. Right? They're used to this. They, in some sense, demanded it. But we didn't go kind of back down to brass tacks and kind of first principles and understand like what are the underlying motivations? Why is a lockbox so important? Right? It turns out that they don't just want a lockbox. They want tight cash flow management. They want automated distributions. They want a certain level of security. Right? They want preferential treatment in the case of a default or bankruptcy. There's kind of a list of underlying motivations that kind of led up to their demand for a lockbox. And so when we tried to roll this out across a bunch of projects, the tech was there, but we also found that we had to negotiate the terms with each of our stakeholders, right? One stakeholder knew exactly what it was and loved it. All the other stakeholders thought that sounded really complicated and really unnecessary and it took a lot of time. So now we're negotiating contracts and terms and just trying to roll out each new lockbox with each new project. And it just did not scale, right? We're not here to build one more solar project. We're here to build 10,000. And so that is not a good solution, and we had to really kind of, again, go back to fundamentals and figure out how can we scratch this one stakeholder's itch but take a different tact. And what made it super painful and why I think it's a decent story is that unwinding it was almost worse than building it the first time. We had a bunch of projects that were already launched. We had a bunch of lockboxes that were already built. We had already negotiated those lockboxes with 100 different customers. And now we had to go back to them and say, you know what, we're not going to support lockboxes anymore. Like, I'm sorry I crammed that down your throat for the last 6 months, but it's not necessary. And we had to stand up an entirely different solution. That's a whole other story. But it was kind of egg on the face because we told everyone that this was necessary and they'd fought us tooth and nail. And literally 6 months later, we were like, you know what, sorry. And so I think it comes down to, kind of discovery and validation. We built what a customer asked for, not necessarily what they needed. And I'm cautious to use kind of that classic UX line. I think it's from Jobs about building what people need and not what they want. I think it sometimes gives us product people a little bit of hubris and a little too much license. But in this case, we did not do our homework. And we sunk probably 6 months into building the solution. It encompassed all of our engineering resources, and it was a massive misstep for us as a product org. So, lessons learned, but super painful one.
It's a good example of, in Kevin's case, spending millions of dollars that you're just kind of shelving a project or essentially throwing away that development time. Sam's has a spin down effect that. Kevin's may or may not have had that, but essentially the cost can come afterwards, right, in a really big way with sales teams having to be dialed back, repositioning the product. So both interesting cases, probably both costing millions in cases. Jess?
Yeah. Ouch. This was really hard because it was like, well, they all failed for different reasons. But I wanted to go with one that I think is really that we can all tactically learn from, like even right now, for all of you who have products. I hope that as I tell you this story, it might give you some ideas of how to avoid a similar situation. So this was while I was at GoSpotCheck. I don't think they would care if I name names. I was managing at the time our external API, which is effectively a way to put data into our system and take data out of our system. It was always sort of the ugly stepchild or whatever you call it. It was the product that existed but never really had management. It was built by engineers in the early days as like a requirement for an early customer, but it wasn't really a big part of the strategy and just kind of always sat there as like a forgotten secondary product. So I had these big hopes and dreams for it, and I'm not technical. My background, by the way, is in UX design, but I just thought it would be there was a ton of potential in this product. It was around 2016 when If This Then That came out, and Zapier was just starting to get a lot of traction, so I was hot on the API potential. And so I put a lot of effort into the strategy of this because we were starting to sell to more and more enterprises that wanted access to their data without having to come through our teams. And I just saw this as a huge scaling opportunity. So I took over this product, crafted what I thought was an amazing roadmap over how we were going to move from just straightforward CRUD operations to more intelligent logic-based API calls, and started to decide, as any good product manager would do, not just what to add, but what I would remove. And there's a saying in product, or at least my engineers have said it before, the fastest way to find out who's using something is to turn it off. I would recommend that you don't do that. In our case, so because this API was built without a lot of strategic thinking up front, it was just sort of we got to build this and get it done and get it out there. There was little to no visibility for me as a product owner on who was using it, what types of calls are being made, which endpoints are being called. Like quite literally, the only way I could get at this information was to use my very basic SQL skills to pull reports from logs to find out if I thought certain endpoints were being used. And so I had done that homework. I had chatted with as many of my customer success folks as I could. I also managed to gather email addresses for who I thought were our contacts on the customer sides, to send out announcements of deprecation notices. I had put the deprecation, 3 to 6 months out into the future. I thought I did all the right things. So we turned it off. That was the worst day. One of our clients, I will not name, but they are a well-known deli meat manufacturer, had a P1 emergency that got escalated to the leadership of that organization. And boy, was it a mess. I was joking at the time to cope that it was a baloney emergency. But the reality was, as it turned out, this API that I thought was not used in a strategic fashion for any of our customers was actually powering their entire leadership dashboard that told them whether or not they were on point for all of their sales goals and distribution goals. Whoops! So lesson learned. A few things. I think it's influenced how I think about developing products now. I used to think that analytics and ability to do rollbacks or feature flags or all those things that we sometimes take for granted with more mature products, I always thought that stuff could wait. And it turns out that was actually a really big hit to our reputation with those early clients. This is B2B, where you have these big whales, right? And your reputation in those early adopters is huge. So that continued to come up over the years in every renewal with that client. It affected word of mouth and stability of our product. So I think, we don't want to over-index on things like product analytics and logging and, feature flagging and all that stuff that gives us visibility and control. But just like we do with our products, I think you have to have an element of it in order for it to actually qualify as an MVP, because I simply did not have any way of knowing that my changes that I thought would be helpful would turn out to be so hurtful. And the second piece of it is getting better at go-to-market. So I don't think I was clear enough with my stakeholders and with my customers about what exactly was happening and what exactly the ramifications would be. And there was, by the way, a different endpoint that I wanted to migrate folks to. I'd given them notice on that. So this wasn't a, shut it off, no other option type of situation. It was here's an upgrade, take advantage. But no one did. And so, yeah, don't do that. Try to find out other ways to learn if your products are being used and how you can release something appropriately.
It sounds like your engineers were right. You found out who was using that.
I did. Quickly.
Yes.
Very quickly.
I have similar stories to Kevin and Sam, where you spend $1 million and you don't have a product that people actually need. It happens a lot, especially in early stage startups. But I think the one that I'll share is actually more about cross-team collaboration. And so the story I have is I was working in a company where we had a software, hardware, two products, software and hardware, and it was a birth control pill case. It was supposed to be smart, connected to the app, would remind you to take your pill, give you insights into your cycle, things like that. So it was my first leadership position. Again, working as a solo PM, coming into an early stage company, so excited to hit the ground running. I had my strategy. I was ready to go. I'm the kind of person who takes things and I just go with it. And sometimes that can be a detriment because a couple months in, I'm, helping build out this first version of the product. We had already kind of gotten past MVP. We're trying to build on some features that we thought people wanted. We had done all the customer interviews, but I'm looking at it and we're not getting conversions. And so I go back and I'm like, okay, think about my old sales marketing days. How are we talking to people about this product? And I realized, I go through all of our marketing materials again, and I realize we're messaging hormone health. And then I look at the user data, and I realize that a lot of people are coming to us thinking they're going to get hormone therapy. And that's not at all what we're doing. And so I sat down with the head of marketing, and we hashed it out. And I had some really big learnings here that I've taken with me throughout my career. One of them is every time I come into a company, I interview the head of every department and the important people who are really doing the work, because if you don't do that, then you can have this dysfunction. Oftentimes, as a PM, especially in smaller companies, you stand in the middle of everyone else. Even if you're not managing those people, you a lot of times have access to and you hear things across the organization that other people do not. So you really have to help connect the dots. So I did that. Talk to our CEO who's running sales, talk to marketing, talk to the engineers, and then all of a sudden I had a better picture of where things were going, and I put together a proposal and took it to the execs and said, hey, here's what we're doing now. This is why it's not working. Here's all the disconnect. We need a better plan to move forward. And so I've carried that with me throughout my career because it's just such an important piece that I think we often miss as PMs. You can be really good at all the agile processes, but if you're not good at connecting with the people across the organization, then it can be really detrimental.
Yeah, I think that's a good example to add here. Kevin, did you want to add something?
Sorry to cut you off. I'm so glad you said that because I was actually just thinking about this morning, and I was maybe a weird thought, but I was like, why we call these product orgs, and then we have sales and marketing, and like, isn't that really the company is the product org, right? Like, maybe it should be called the product development part of the company or something, but because at every company I've been at, when I was trying to think of like mess ups, there's been a consistent like division between product, marketing, and sales. And maybe that's just the companies I happen to be at. But it's like, oh, these sales guys are out selling stuff that they're promising things that we don't even have, and now we have to go make it. Or the marketing team doesn't get us. They don't get what we're actually doing, and they're way off in how they're talking about us. And I'm like, I think that collaboration you're talking about, where it's like, hey, we're all one company here. The product is the thing that you hold or the thing that you see, whatever kind of product it is, and the marketing and the sales. It's a whole thing. And so I just think it's an interesting topic. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, where the line ends, right? It's not like product here, then sales and marketing take off, right? And I think true product champions, right? You're looking at what is the dysfunction and getting that product to fulfill its need, right? And those are all good examples at different stages of where we're trying to do that. Sometimes it's with marketing. Sometimes it's before anyone in the market knows about it, in Kevin's example, where you spent millions of dollars on something that didn't make it to market. So those are all very interesting. Want to pause here on product fuck-ups. Any questions from the audience that you're curious? Yeah.
I'm curious, of the stories you guys just shared, how many of the companies in those scenarios had product marketing?
So just to repeat for the folks in the back, of the stories that were shared, how many of those organizations had the function of product marketing in those organizations?
I was just going to say not mine. I didn't even know what it was, but I'll tell you what, shortly after that little situation, product marketing became a topic of discussion. As far as I know, that organization now has product marketers, but that was at the time something that was considered a responsibility of product to coordinate along with other stakeholders as needed. Yeah. Loaded question there, though. Are you a product marketer? Ha-ha.
Yeah, I honestly think we need to be talking about that more. It's hard because I've been in a lot of smaller early stage companies. It's a lot harder. But as you start growing and scaling, I think companies need to really think about bringing in someone who has that product marketing background to help just make everything really cohesive. So that's a really great point.
And just add on one point there. Yes, real quick. Where is the hand? Oh, okay. I'll get to you in a second. So on product marketing, I've had the opportunity to work in an organization that was very large and did have the function of product marketing. And I think as a product manager, without a formal product marketing department, often you have a marketing department, right? And a product marketing department is going to know more about the details of the problems that it solves. When I've worked with just a marketing department, you end out kind of in the scenario of like, well, you kind of have to understand it in more detail to write the copy for that or come up with the messaging. And it's really great when organizations have true product marketers because they're understanding not just and I don't want to distill down what marketing is, but where we're going to put it, who's the audience, but what's that true message that connects? And I know product folks really care about that connection side. So product marketing, again, a whole new topic that maybe we include in a future session. Yes?
Do you find interviewing users regularly or as projects come up? Like what do you find, works for product management better? And then if you are, or as you're regularly doing your user interviews and stuff to get information, have you found a process of like automating that and who on the team is actually doing that outreach for those user interviews?
So just to repeat the question real quick for the folks in the back, user interviews, how often are they happening? Who's doing them? And are there any tools to sort of assist with that? We actually had a session, A/B user testing session yesterday, so they are available for recording. But a good question, and this is a great panel to ask it for them.
I have a pretty non-traditional answer to that. So we actually don't use product analytics. And the reality is that most of our users are internal, right? So we're building software for our colleagues.
Can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Cool. So we're a little non-traditional in that we're building software for our own colleagues. That is, our users are sitting right next to me, which is a little unique. And so we haven't invested in product analytics in a way that you might expect most traditional product companies to. What we've actually done is we've stood up what we call product operations. So it's an entirely separate team. Their whole job is to own product rollouts. And so they educate our users on how to use new features. They watch them. They literally look over their shoulder on a daily basis and see how those tools are being employed. They spot bugs. They reset default settings based off of the patterns that we're seeing. Their job is in a very high bandwidth way to sit next to our users and help them use these tools. Obviously, as those tools mature, the focus of that product operations team can diminish over time. But it's really been incredibly valuable over the first 6 months, just so we can rapidly iterate and kind of scale.
Yeah, I love that topic. So I think for me, it's all of the above in that if you're only, I've seen situations where there's I think you said, do you do user research when a new product, kicks off? And in that case, you can kind of fall into a trap, I think, where it's like, well, we have this product idea, and now we're going to do research to kind of back up the idea. And so you're starting with a point of view. You're kind of starting with the solution sometimes instead of trying to identify the problem. And it's not like that's going to be bad data, but if you're only doing that, I think that's where you get into trouble. We try to do a combination, and I'm talking about outside now, but I guess in general, everywhere I've been, there's that range of all the way over here, the design thinking brain, where you're just always observing and you're around your customers, you're in these scenarios where you're just kind of keeping that fresh eyes on identifying problems. Research-wise, we recently went through something because we're building a new app where we specifically did not talk about features or product ideas with people. We just knew that we wanted to talk to a younger audience, and we wanted to understand what are the barriers to them to getting outside, because outside's mission is to get more people outside. And so we didn't talk about hey, what if an app did this to help you get outside? It was more, just tell us about yourself. What do you do today? Do you go with friends? Do you, what are your barriers? Is it time? Is it weather? And so that kind of research, I think, is so awesome, that discovery phase kind of research, because that really bubbles up from the actual problem space versus us kind of starting with the solution and kind of trying to gain support. And I'll tell one quick funny story about that. I worked with a product manager who really, really wanted to do this product. And he showed me the questionnaire he was going to send out, and it described the product, and then the questions were, how much do you like this product? A little bit, a lot, a whole heck of a lot, something like that. And there was no negative answer. So no matter what the what the results were. He's going to be able to show like executive leadership, like, look, like 90% of the people really like this, like, you know, and like you can't ask the question that way, but.
Unless you want it to get done, right? So, all right, cool. Well, thank you for the questions. I'll try and pause. These are great, so thank
Scotty,
you.
can I add in a
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, of course.
I'm really gonna be polarizing. I think it's challenging at best to automate and leverage tools. Having said that, I swear that every day there's a new product management tool that promises to organize your research findings. Personally, I think the way that you solve for that is you create ownership and stickiness in your teams and clarity around what teams own. So when I'm setting up teams, there's a very clear line between the mission of the organization, our product strategy, and the way in which teams are structured to allow for that authority and autonomy and clarity, so that if a PM, for example, is owning an initiative around the experience of a particular persona, for example, that team, not just that PM, but that team is empowered to learn all about that problem space, to your point, Kevin, through generative research as well as validative research. And because I think, please prove me wrong, find me on LinkedIn, tell me how wrong I am. I think the magic that happens in teams is not that I have 3,000 records in a database of insights I've discovered over the years, but I think it's the human interactions with customers and data to drive those insights and constantly iterate. And so I will often move my clients away from targets that involve these like highly configurable tools. Like I'm thinking of AHA, for example, ProdPan, ProdPad. I'm a big believer that if it's important, it's going to come back up.
Yeah, totally. And real quick, just on that too, I think that because I had to build a whole analytics stack at a company I was with, and
I think I told you not to.
yeah, exactly. And I was just like, but we need this information. What I saw happen was that it then took away your general day-to-day curiosity, because you're just expecting it to start having an output and telling you things instead of being like, I'm wondering about this. I have this question. Let me go figure it out. She went through all these records with SQL to figure it out and probably learned a lot more than she ever would have if something was spitting out reports. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Lots of passionate answers, yes. So moving on a little bit, I know we have a lot of topics and things we want to get to, but we're cranking through time. So I did want to ask a question that I think resonates with a lot of product folks around when you see breakdowns occur, whether it's because you didn't have user feedback or it's because you have an internal or external stakeholder that has an issue. I know different organizations, there's lots of different product roles and functions. You might have an aging product, you might have something that hasn't been to the market. But is there a place that you guys see a general trend that product dysfunctions occur, whether internal being decision-making, building, testing, engineering, or more external, post-launch, product market fit? Is there somewhere that, anyone here that's aspiring or early in their career in product that you think is really important to shed light on to make sure those breakdowns don't occur?
Yeah, I love this topic. I talk to a lot of my product friends about this quite often. There's a lot of things that can break down within an organization, but I think the biggest thing that I've seen is the breakdown of leadership and not communicating down into the organization, and then also not creating that North Star for the team. So I have to bring this up, I feel like, in every single time I'm within an organization. What are we trying to accomplish? What is our North Star? Because the companies I've seen fail, they didn't have a focus. They didn't know what they were working towards. Everyone had great ideas, but they were scattered. People were working in different silos on the same thing differently sometimes. And it comes from the top down, but it can also come from you even just, in a product management role where you can step up and say, hey, what are we actually doing? I actually just had this conversation this last week. I'm with Ruth Health, a women's health startup, and we've kind of changed. It's early stage. We're kind of testing different things, changing things. I could see the team getting scattered and kind of, trying to come up with things and scramble. And so I said to the founders, we need a North Star. we need that direction from both of you. I can have the direction, but I'm not the founders. I'm not the person who has created this vision. So driving that forward is, I think, just really, really important. And then when you have a focus, you can start to prioritize all your other efforts to that focus. Why are we doing this one thing if it doesn't align with our North Star or our OKRs? And that can really help you to move that forward.
So my whole career has been in B2B. How many of you are working on B2B products? Yeah, right? There's more of us, I swear. It's a unique beast. The area of friction that I've seen over and over and over again is between product and customer success, I would say. And I'm wrapping sales up into that kind of. The reason that happens, I think, is a couple things. Number one, to your point, they're reporting to different people. So they're getting different stories about what is important and where we're heading, right? Sales is all about leads, or CS might be all about renewals and usage. I think what can also happen is that we have different incentives. Product folks have a broader perspective, right? We're trying to build things that work for everyone, whereas our sales and CS folks are very aligned with certain customers because their incentives might be commission-based or sales-based, renewal-based. Whereas I used to even joke with my customers, like, I'm here to talk to you, but I don't get any sort of money if you stay on, so I don't care if you like my answer. JK, I would care, but to a point, right? I want to build the best product for the market, not just for you, specific customer. So as far as solving for that, I think the things that I've seen work, number one, is that North Star, where we stop thinking of these departments as somehow against each other, right? Like either we build a great product or we hit our sales goals. It's like, ideally we do both, and customers can't wait to renew. And so my one piece of advice I would say for those of you in organizations that have CS, if you feel like that relation is tenuous, work on it and be transparent. Just as a small anecdote, my best friend was actually a CS person, a senior CS person at Go Spot Check when I was there. We were best friends before. We continue to be best friends, thank goodness. But there was a rocky period, and we happened to be living together at the time. And we were going through some major product adjustments. We were starting to scale, and there was this major element in the product that required a ton of manual work by our customer success team. It had just never been prioritized as an area that we wanted to work on in product, and it continued to fall off every quarter. And so after one quarterly planning over dinner and some wine, I got an earful about how I was affecting her personally, because it just so happened that by not fixing this problem with software, it was causing her to have to work late every single night to do manual data uploads and data inputs. It was causing friction in her customer base. She was losing renewals because it was this whole thing. And so in that situation, I got the visibility and was able to have some candid conversations with her about how the goals of the company, we just didn't see the ROI coming from this, and that we were looking into other ways to solve the problem that was not software. We happened to go with a mechanical Turk type solution. But it was interesting that, like I said, that kind of, it doesn't have to be that way. CS and product can be friends. And I think it's about finding those shared goals. I went through it the hard way, but hopefully you all can find better paths.
Drinking with colleagues, that always helps.
Yeah,
right?
you really get to the core of it quickly.
Yeah, I think kind of getting at what you were talking about, what I've seen break down most frequently has been really communication around ownership of product. Kind of like Scotty mentioned early on, there's a product group within a company, but more broadly, there's a product organization at hand here. And so, at our current company, but also at my previous companies, we sit down with every new hire in their first week, and we talk about what is a product company, how do you define it, what are some examples, what is a service company, how do you define that, what are some examples, kind of where does our company fit into that framework, and then how does that influence how you think about success and how you think about your role here. So whether you're a salesperson or an operations analyst or a product manager, you may very well have some kind of quota that needs to be hit, but you also need to be investing in kind of the processes and the products and the engine that we're building as an organization. And there's naturally going to be some tension and some trade-offs when kind of push comes to shove, but broadly, this is kind of everyone's responsibility. And so we've seen this, like I said, we have these conversations every single week with every new hire. And we hit on this as a company probably on a quarterly basis about what we're all here to do together. And I think, we also have found that sometimes that communication isn't enough. Sometimes we have to spin up new groups like that product operations team that I mentioned, because people are dealing with a mix of priorities, and they can either get one more deal done or they can file a ticket about a bug. And their incentive structures probably don't align. And so we sometimes just focus on communication and try to imbue everyone with ownership over what we're doing as a product org. And other times we have to do something much more structural and functional to try to get at that same need.
Kevin, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I might jump on the communication part. There's so many stories coming up for me listening to you three. But I'll tell a real story from a real company. So at Sphero, that does the robotic products for kids, there was a point in time, and it was about when I stepped into the VP of product role there, where the CEO was asking me like, hey, why are people burnt out? And some people were leaving. What's going on? It's such a cool company. And it is a cool company. If you know their products, it's like really cool stuff. And my thought, just from thinking back to my time at Slice of Lime, was that the people there were really smart and really passionate about what they were doing. They loved this kind of work, but they didn't know why they were doing this work. And just to kind of back up a little bit, the lowest point in my whole career has been at Slice of Lime, about halfway through my time there. So, like I said in the beginning, I ran that for 15 years. About 7 years in, we still didn't know what our why was. I didn't even know that as a concept. We were just building stuff, and people would pay us. So I had an employee come up to me and say hey, why do I come to work every day? And I knew what they were asking, but I gave a snarky answer, and it was because I pay you to come to work every day. It was I just felt like crap, and I knew what they were getting at, and I knew I didn't have an answer at all, and that was the turning point for the company. So fast forward to Sphero, and I've seen this why problem everywhere I've been. We took the time to then define what Sphero was all about, and that was a whole group effort at the executive level, and they landed on to inspire the creators of tomorrow. They also needed to repeat that over and over and over again, because like we just said, that can kind of drift away in people's consciousness. The executive team can sometimes think everyone's got it because they're thinking about it all the time and they're talking about it in every meeting, but everyone else is going about their day and not thinking about that. So repeating that why and really being solid on why this company exists is so critical. And what happened from there, the positive side of the story here is that directed, first of all, people could really get on board. They're okay, we're going to inspire the creators of tomorrow, these kids that want to be future engineers or future leaders. We wound up dropping all of our licensed products. We had these cool products with Disney doing Star Wars stuff, and focused more on our roots, which was more about education and getting kids to invent stuff. And if you look at Sphero today, it's doing awesome because they've stayed on that path and they're very focused. So I'd say knowing that North Star, knowing that why is by far the most important thing I've seen.
Yeah, that's a great example. And North Stars, right? They inspire the teams that, as Kevin said, the teams that make up the organizations that we're at. It's not a product question, right? It's kind of what holds everyone together. It's just core to product. All right, so we're cruising through time. I do want to jump to our last question just because I think it's helpful for anyone looking into product or in product, really around what frameworks, books, resources do you think are good, have helped you in your career, ones you'd recommend for the team? Anyone can start.
Why you look at me? Just because I spend my life reading and listening to podcasts so I can share wisdom with others? No, on a serious note, I think if there was one book to read on product, I'm a Marty Kagan fangirl. So I'm going to say Empowered, because in my mind, that book should have been named The Product Leader's Bible. I don't know why he didn't, but yeah, I mean, I think as you get into product, even if you're not a product leader today, you are a leader in the organization as a product person. And so by understanding I fully believe in the mechanics that he puts forward around having teams that understand the outcomes they're trying to drive, the North Stars, connecting your strategy to your team structures, having clear principles on how we work and how we make decisions, that even as an individual contributor on a team, knowing those things so that you can see when your company does not have them and coaching up to get those things in place, that's really important. So I would say there's plenty of others I could pick from, but I'd say start there.
Yeah, so I have a Marty Kagan one too. I have three I could think of. So Marty Kagan's Inspired, the other cool Marty Kagan book. That one I read and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so spot on and helpful, and I think everyone should read it. And just brings you through the whole product process, everything from strategy and to research to, post-launch, what do you do? So it's excellent. The other two I could think of were, I have Creativity Inc. on my shelf. I come back to that one a lot. That's the Pixar story, and it really does document, like, how did they go from this little team to this giant team, and what did they learn along the way. And in the spirit of this talk, it really is like, hey, they talk about the F-ups at the company, and they're very open about it. It's really inspiring to read. And the last one is not a book, but I've taken this course a couple times, IDEO's Designing a Business, which, if your company can spot you for it, I think it's like $500 or something, but it takes that design thinking view, but applies it to product and business. And I just think it's such a cool way of kind of going about thinking through your product. And so at one of my companies, I had all the product managers take that course, and it's just, I highly recommend it.
Has anyone heard of Lenny's newsletter or Lenny's podcast? I am a huge fan, and I like it over any of the books I've read because it's all really dynamic and relevant to today. Like, books have great frameworks, but I love how he has a private Slack channel where he'll ask people questions, and you get people from all over the world and different types of companies answering it. And it's just really dynamic, really cool to hear about what's going on in other companies. But then he also just knows his shit. And yes, and he also seems like a really cool guy that you'd want to have like a beer with. And then he has a podcast now too, and he has some really great people on that as well. So I've learned a lot from Lenny.
It's unfortunate I'm last year because I don't have a good answer here. I've read all of those books. They're all great. I've read the 0 to 1s, right, which are probably a bit of a higher level and more kind of business oriented. I also try personally to read around the periphery. I don't want to spend my time thinking too much about product or design how everyone else does. And I like to find kind of patterns in other realms. So whether it's a biological study that came out or, something about space, I find just like as product people and as designers and as project managers, our ability to pattern match kind of across those different domains and kind of apply one lesson here to an application over there is super exciting, and like that's where I get most excited by. So I don't do too much digging into like different processes and frameworks, which again, kind of a lame answer, but.
No, I love that. And actually, I'm also reading slowly Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics because it gives you an idea of what economics is and how it works across the world. And it's in very plain terms. And I'm just nerding out on it because it's like, oh, this is how pricing works. And you need to know those kinds of things when you're a PM. So another good one.
Well, great. This has been so fun. Thank you, Kevin, Sam, Jess, and Stacy. This has been wonderful. And thank you to all of you. I would pause for questions, but I know there's tight schedules for people going to other events. We do have the room, so if any of you want to mingle and the panel's able to, we'll be up here. But thank you to all of you, and thank you to the panel.